From an early age, I was keenly aware that my dad was quite wealthy, even when we still lived in a tiny two-up, two-down terrace house in Garin, and I had just started school. I remember feeling this almost overwhelming sense of pride because my dad had the best car on the street. It was the late 70s back then, and the neighborhood in Liverpool we called home was pretty rough. Crime was everywhere, unemployment was high, and both my parents had grown up in conditions so desperate that I had to see their stories to believe them. I think that's what shaped who my dad became. His parents had struggled to get by with hardly anything, so by the time he was a young man, money was what he couldn't stop thinking about. I always heard he was sharp as a tack growing up, done well in school, scored top marks on his exams, but when it came to choosing a trade, he surprised everyone by saying he wanted to go to college instead. To him, getting a degree in business or accounting was the golden ticket to a lifetime of good earnings. But after traveling down to London for an economics interview, he came back with a completely different plan. Back then, in the late 70s, Russia was called the USSR and was behind what they called the Iron Curtain. This meant strict rules on what could be exported and huge bureaucratic hurdles on both sides if you wanted to trade with them or even import Russian antiques. Still, London had a massive, wealthy community of Russian expats, and apparently there was a way to make a fortune selling relics from their homeland they couldn't return to. That's exactly what my dad started doing. He got the idea from some old-timer in a pub who'd listened to his story and decided to pass him a tip. At first, importing valuable old Russian artifacts seemed impossible with all the paperwork, delays, and red tape. But then he thought, what if he had someone inside Russia who could tip the scales in his favor? Suddenly, what took months of paperwork and endless waiting turned into a handshake and some cash in an envelope. This man inside Russia was offered by the old guy from the pub. A few weeks later, my dad was on a boat heading for Murmansk, a big port city near Norway, where he met his contact. That's where he really started getting serious, buying his first antique religious icon for just a few hundred quid, say, about 12,000 toddy, and flipping it for a total of about 3,000 pounds, which was around 12,000 pounds back then, too. When you consider he bought it cheaply from his contact, it's easy to see how he raked in the money. Soon after, we left Garin and moved into a big, fancy house in Halewood. I was still in primary school, and that new home was another source of pride for me and my younger brother. Everything was close to our school and friends, so life was pretty good. But in 1989, when I was 14, Dad dropped a bombshell, said we were moving again. Not just nearby. I thought he was joking at first. This time, we were moving to a tiny rural village called Waterride, tucked away on the east coast of Scotland, basically in the middle of nowhere. I couldn't believe it when he first told us. His business was in Liverpool, our schools were in Liverpool, and all our friends were there. Why the hell would he want to leave everything and move to the sticks? I remember us sitting around the kitchen table, my mom, my little brother, just staring at him in disbelief. He explained that he'd finally made enough money to do what he'd always dreamed: move up to Aberdeenshire, the land of his ancestors, and become a quiet, simple gentleman farmer. What came after that was like a step through the stages of grief. At first, we just couldn't believe it. We got furious, asking him how he could do this to us. I was just getting my first boyfriend, my little brother loved his scout troop, and my mom thought life in the middle of nowhere sounded deadly boring. We'd put down roots in Liverpool, and now we were being uprooted. So, naturally, we bargained, begging if we could stay in Liverpool while he made the move. He said no, was selling the house to fund the new one, and that sent us into depression. But then, about a week later, Dad packed everything into a moving truck, and we got in the car behind him, heading up to Aberdeenshire. Looking back, crossing into Scotland was breathtaking, beautiful scenery, large houses lining the river bank, but in our mood, we couldn't enjoy any of it. Nubra, a small seaside town just down the road, was picturesque but felt like stepping back in time. No fancy shops, no arcades, not even a cinema. Just houses, ponds, fields, and a few tiny shops and cafes. Dad took us to the local shop that first day, tried to cheer us up with some cake, and gave a little pep talk. His idea was that I'd only have to live in this quiet place for 4 years, away from the distractions of the city, so I could focus on my exams. That way, I'd get into my first choice university, then enjoy drinks, smoking, and clubbing once I was back in Liverpool, safe from his watchful eye. And honestly, I held on to some hope that it would all work out. Talked to my friends on the phone, visited back home to see my grandma, and figured I could still make it into Liverpool Uni, back where I felt I belonged. My little brother adapted quickly, especially once he found out Nubra had its own scout troop. Over the next few weeks, we started adjusting to life in the Scottish countryside. I started school, nervously worried about being some English outsider, but I made friends with a couple of local girls pretty fast. We'd walk on beaches, which made me appreciate Nubra and water ride more. We'd grab coffee afterward, chatting about everything under the sun. One day, as I was sipping tea and enjoying cake at a cafe, Nicola leaned over and whispered, "That man is looking at you." Her eyes were fixed on the table. I felt my heart skip a beat. She then added casually, "He keeps looking here, mostly at you, but he's behind you." I turned slightly, pretending to look at the menu board, and there he was standing in my peripheral vision. When I looked again, I caught him glancing my way. Nicola was right. I asked her if she recognized him, and she said no, she knew everyone in Nubra, and this guy was a stranger. Someone new in town who was definitely interested in me. I wasn't flattered. I was only 14, and he looked like he was in his 20s or 30s, way too old for me. The first thought in my mind, pervert. But then I convinced myself he might not live around here. If he didn't, I wouldn't have to worry once I finished my cake. That thought made me breathe easier. Still, knowing he was staring made it hard to enjoy the moment. As we finished and stood to leave, we looked back and realized that he was following us. Nicola swore it was her sixth sense kicking in. We headed down the lane and she looked over her shoulder, then whispered, "Yeah, he's definitely following us." Honestly, I wanted to run, but Nicola turned around and asked boldly, "Are you following us, you perv?" He was tall, dark-haired, wearing a dark jacket, and sunglasses even though it was a cloudy day. For a moment, I thought he was going to answer, just heading to my car so it'd all be nothing. But he just kept walking silently behind us, not saying a word. When he got close, we felt uneasy, but then he simply passed us, didn't look at us, didn't say a thing, just carried on. We just stopped there in shock. What the hell was that? We had no idea why he didn't respond to a 14-year-old girl calling him a perv. But what we knew was that we weren't about to walk the same way as Heimven if it meant going the long way home. Instead, Nicola and I headed back into town, sat in the cafe for half an hour, then tried to walk home again. We talked about what happened, then parted ways. As I approached the bridge over the river, I saw someone in the car park just off to the side sitting by a car, and it looked suspiciously like the man with the sunglasses. I told my mom about it as soon as I got home. She brushed it off, saying probably just a tourist. Those folks love driving up the coast, stopping here and there. She said that unwanted stares were part of life. Men looked at women when they were being creepy, and guys stared at each other trying to start trouble at the pub too. Her advice: avoid the stare, leave if you feel unsafe. She also told me she liked the sound of Nicola calling him a pervert. For a little reassurance, I thought I'd never see him again and relaxed. But just a few days later, I saw him again walking into town on my own, and my stomach sank. When I saw him standing at a shop doorway, wearing the same sunglasses and jacket, I panicked. I prayed he wouldn't follow me again. And he didn't just stand there, he did. I doubled back, tried to lose him, but he tracked me. So I ended up calling a minicab to drive me home, and thankfully, by the time it arrived outside the cafe, he seemed to have grown bored of me. I was both relieved and annoyed. If I'd known he'd get tired, I wouldn't have wasted money on the cab. During the ride, I chatted with the driver. Then as we crossed the bridge near my house, I saw a car behind us close enough to see clearly, but not too close. I swore I recognized it, and I had because it was the same car I'd seen parked near the bridge just days before, and in the passenger seat, the man with the sunglasses. As I climbed out, I felt this sinking feeling. He followed the cab. I felt horribly sick, uneasy feeling in my gut, walking up to my house knowing he was out there. When I got inside, I told my mom. Her face dropped at the sight of the car, realizing just how serious it was. This wasn't just some pervy old man. He was stalking me. My dad, who was usually out playing golf or at the pub, ran downstairs when he heard me crying. When I told him what happened, I thought he'd be furious, calling the police right away. Instead, he looked terrified more than I'd ever seen. He asked me to describe the guy, the car, what he sounded like, all the details I could give. But that was it. I expected him to dial 999, but he just sat there, wide-eyed, heavy with fear. I asked Dad, "Aren't you going to call the police?" Mom started asking what was wrong, why he looked like that, and he told her to be quiet and asked me to go upstairs with my brother. Our brother was glued to his new computer and TV, blissfully unaware of what was happening downstairs. I couldn't stay put. A minute later, I sneaked out of my room, listened from the top of the stairs, and overheard their argument, faint, tense. Dad was clearly scared, and Mom was crying her eyes out. Finally, she told me to pack my bag because we were leaving that very night. No part of me wanted to leave our house, but I knew it was serious. She said we'd never come back, that this was the end of water ride. She went to my little brother's room to tell him the same. Maybe an hour later, we were on the move, packed into Dad's Range Rover, driving down a narrow country lane bordered by dry stone walls. I sat in the back with my brother, while Mom and Dad sat up front, quiet, tense as hell. The tears still stained their faces. My brother was furious about moving again, and I was just shell-shocked. Not long before, I'd been in town buying school supplies, and now I was uprooted once more, and somehow I blamed myself for it. The drive through the night was eerily quiet until suddenly I heard a loud engine revving behind us. I turned and saw a car speeding toward us with headlights glaring. I screamed at Dad to look, and he did, eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. He sped up, trying to outrun it, but the other car was faster. Then, out of nowhere, it rammed into our back bumper so hard I thought the whole car would shake apart. My little brother started screaming. Mom shouted something, but all I did was hold him tight, not knowing what else to do. Next, the car in pursuit pulled alongside us, a stranger leaning out and shouting, "Stop the car. I'm warning you, stop." My dad didn't look at him, just kept his eyes on the road, trying to escape. Their vehicle was a much faster 4x4, and it kept pace. The stranger then leaned back inside, and abruptly, they swerved right to try and push us off the road. Dad accelerated, but with the twisting road, our tires squealed, and we fought to stay on the tarmac. Behind us, the other car bashed into us again, harder than before, making the car shake violently. I truly believed we weren't going to make it. Any second, we'd end up in a ditch or smashing into a tree, maybe even flipping and catching fire with us inside. Every second felt like the end. I just hugged my brother, who was crying, and repeated to him, "We'll be fine, I promise," even though I was terrified myself. When I finally opened my eyes again, I saw a rooftop outside the window, a sign we were near a building, probably close to a village. Dad kept weaving through the bends, pushing the car closer to safety. As we neared the village, the pursuing vehicle hesitated, then pulled back, headlights dimming. I saw houses with lights on, people walking nearby. Finally, the car behind us slowed, turned onto a side street, and disappeared. Dad slowed down as we reached the town's main street, then kept driving all the way down the coast to Edinburgh. We checked into a hotel, Mom and Dad in one room, my brother and I in another. Mom and Dad kept arguing all night, but I was only 14 and too young to really understand what was going on. I sensed there was something they weren't telling me, something huge. I didn't find out until many years later, when Dad ran off with a woman in Bulgaria. It wasn't antiques he'd been dealing with, that was just a cover. Turns out all those relics were fake, made by Russian traffickers filled with packaged heroin instead of antiquities. That's how my dad made his real money, smuggling drugs into Britain. For a while, he was pulling in millions, pouring money back into the community partly out of necessity, partly out of greed, to keep the cops at bay. We moved from Liverpool to that big house in Halewood, and even after all that, Dad was still working with a network of distributors across the country, making lots of cash. Then one day, he wanted to retire. He told his parents, offered to train someone new, but they didn't like the idea of him quitting. They made him an offer. Keep importing heroin from Russia, keep everyone happy, or he and his family would end up far from everything, on some remote farm. Dad pretended to accept, kept going for a bit, then one day, he vanished. He didn't tell us he was moving to Scotland, couldn't risk us knowing. Once he disappeared, his partners sent people looking for him, professionals. Eventually found us quickly. Mom had no idea how he made his money. When she found out, she demanded a divorce. She believed his work had put us in danger all along, and she couldn't live in ignorance anymore. Eventually, we moved abroad. Dad came with us for a while, but then he vanished again. Last we heard, he was living in Sofia with a younger woman, spending what little money he had left, making the most of the exchange rate. I don't hate him, not like my brother does. I see him as deeply flawed, someone who thought he was smarter than everyone else and could cheat the system. He taught me a lot, mainly, that the people who think they can cheat the system are often just too stupid or arrogant to realize they can't. Because in the end, you can't game the system, it only ever plays you. My name is Kathy. I'm from New England. When I was 12, almost 50 years, Agami family moved from Providence, Rhode Island, to a tiny town called East Corinth, way up in Maine. My dad had been running a construction company since before I was born, and after it took off, he made some real money. He bought us this beautiful 3-story house on Main Street, saying it was for us to grow up with small-town values. To us, it felt like stepping into another world. We went from bustling Providence to a quiet, one-stoplight town where the biggest attraction was the local historical society. Naturally, my brother and I weren't thrilled at first, and Mom wasn't much happier either. But after a few days, we started to like the place seriously. The diner served amazing food, there were courts for basketball near our house, and the peace and quiet at night was unbelievable. Everyone was friendly, neighbors leaving gift baskets, the local pastor stopping by, and 2 girls from the house across the street, Jenny and Joy, knocking on our door to invite me to hang out. They took me to the basketball courts, explaining that everyone's parents trusted them to be out there. They warned me not to wander past the woods behind the courts because that was the home of Trent Baxter, 15, notoriously the biggest bully in the county. His dad was in jail, his mom was an alcoholic, and he'd been so badly behaved at school he was expelled around age 12. He'd gotten into fights, thrown chairs, even drowned a class hamster trying to flush it down the toilet. Luckily, he rarely hung around our neighborhood. The town councilman would see him from his office and threaten to call the sheriff. So Trent mostly moped around the woods near the apartments, setting traps and starting fires. We got the warning from Jenny and Joy, but since he wasn't at the courts or in school, I didn't think much of it. Then, one Friday, they invited me to hang out at the courts again. Down there, I heard about Trent's chaos from Stevie, another kid from the apartments. Stevie said that Trent was furious about the new family moving into town. When Trent found out, he vowed to burn our house down, said it out loud too. Jenny, Joy, and the others assured me Trent's threats weren't always carried out, they were mostly threats. Still, how could I be sure? That night, I told my mom what Stevie had said. She'd heard some rumors about the Baxters, herself pretty frightening ones. But she trusted the town folk, saying they were decent people who wouldn't let the Baxters terrorize anyone, especially newcomers like us. It made me feel a little better. A week after we moved in, I woke up in the middle of the night to a loud crash downstairs. Dad grabbed his gun, ran out, and found someone had thrown a brick through the window attached to a note. Move. The next day, he reported it to the sheriff, who dispatched Deputy Daniels, who grew up just outside town. The deputy said he knew the Baxters, but it wouldn't be easy to track Trent. His dad was in jail, and his mom was a wanderer disappearing for days, drinking, chasing boyfriends, ignoring Trent. Finding Trent would be tough. The deputy figured Trent was impulsive, not calculating, and would get bored eventually. He reassured us, saying Trent had never started a fire big enough to burn a house, so we just had to ride it out. But my parents weren't convinced. They stayed up nights, watching out. Dad didn't even keep his gun out, just hoped to catch Trent in the act and scare him. For a while, it seemed to work. The windows got replaced, and quietly, we thought maybe Trent had given up. Then one morning, Dad went outside to buy milk and found his car covered in dead, disemboweled bird-soul guts pulled out, heads gone. He spent the morning cleaning the car and calling the sheriff. They advised him to park in the garage from now on. Deputy Daniels told him that Trent's known to be impulsive, irreparably angry. He called the cops in that he might do something worse, but he probably wouldn't try again. The deputy added that Trent was more likely just acting out because he was bored, no longer in school, no longer threatening fire. My dad stayed up late, watching for Trent, but he never showed again. The sheriff said Trent's not the kind to set big fires or anything serious. Still, I wasn't reassured. A week later, around 8 a.m., we found a can of gas and matches left on our doorstep. Trent's message clear: leave, or next time I might do something worse. That was the third time someone from the town had come by, or at least the sheriff's deputy had come over. My dad lost his patience, told the deputy to do his job, and that if he couldn't find Trent, he might as well give up. The deputy admitted Trent was a troublemaker, but assured us he'd get bored soon enough. Nonetheless, that feeling of threat lingered. After about a month, it seemed like things had calmed down. That was until one morning, we woke to find our driveway covered with dead birds, and I knew we were in trouble. The next day, Dad's car wouldn't start. Instead, there was a strange high-pitched noise and a huge explosion right from the tailpipe. Bird heads and guts were splattered all over, and Dad called the sheriff again. They told him to park the car in the garage from now on, and that if they caught Trent, who was known for cruelty, especially toward animals, they'd arrest him for animal abuse. Eventually, the threats stopped, or so we thought. Then, just about 2 weeks later, someone knocked at the door early in the morning. It was the mailman, looking pale and pointing at something on the porch. It was a gas can and matches stuff Trent left to scare us. Dad and the deputy got called out again. My dad was furious, told the deputy to do his damn job, convinced Trent was just trying to send a message. The deputy told him Trent was impulsive, not calculating, just a kid throwing tantrums. But that didn't make me feel any safer. A few days later, as we eased into life in East Corinth, everything seemed occultal. I went to school one Friday and Stevie rushed up, riding his bike, and yelled, "Trent's coming." In a panic, everyone scattered. Ryan, an older kid, said he was tired of running, wanted to fight back for once. I didn't like that idea at all, remembering what Mom had said about avoiding violence. But most of the kids believed Ryan, and they started moving toward the woods, talking about going after Trent. I was both scared and furious. These kids, my new friends, and I ran after them. Into the woods we went, calling out for Trent, but I had a feeling something was off. When we reached the deepest part of the woods, I looked around. If Trent was in there, he was gone. I said something to Jenny and Joy, a little older girl who'd become my friend, and suddenly, she stared at me with a strange look I'd never seen before. Before I knew it, everyone was walking toward me, gliding in silently with cold, hard faces. Then Jenny shouted, "That's where you're wrong. The real Trent Baxter is right here." And before I could process it, she shoved me hard into the dirt, yelling, "Here." As I fell, the pain from that shove was nothing compared to what followed. Suddenly, I was surrounded, kicked, punched, stomped by a mob of kids. Someone yelled, "That's Trent Baxter right here." And they kept kicking even as I shielded my head, feeling boots and shoes smashing into my arms, ribs, back, and butt. I curled up, trying to block the blows, until someone tried to stamp on my head, and then I knew I had to move. If I didn't, I'd be dead. I managed to get to my knees, but they pushed me down again. The kicks and punches kept going, but I finally managed to lift myself, then ran like hell. I looked over my shoulder, saw them chasing me, and something inside me snapped. I ran and ran, adrenaline flooding my body, until I hit my street and realized I was finally free of them. I looked back once more. Where was Jenny and Joy? They should have been nearby, but I didn't see them. As I got closer to home, I saw a crowd outside the house, me mom, and to my dread, Jenny and Joy. I was so shaken up, I didn't speak. I just wanted to wash the blood off, clean the dirt from my mouth, and avoid looking at Jenny or Joy. My mom sat me down, pulling out Band-Aids and antiseptic. She kept saying, "Trent Baxter's going to pay for this, sweetheart. You just wait. Once he gets mixed up with the cops, they'll haul him off." I couldn't say much. I didn't cry right away. I just sat there, stunned. Later, after a long shower, I finally broke down and told her the truth. It wasn't Trent Baxter. It was the kids at the courts. All of them. She looked stunned, probably because Jenny and Joy had gone ahead, telling everyone it was Trent who attacked me. When I told her differently, she looked like her world had just shattered. She'd heard stories about the Baxters, pretty wild ones, but she trusted the town folk, and they assured her no family like that existed. Turns out, they just made all this up probably to scare us or keep the new folks in line. A few days of investigation, and Dad confirmed there was no Baxter family in East Corinth since 1934. They'd been invented by the townspeople, a cruel joke. Dad was furious, especially with Deputy Daniels, who lied about meeting Trent and his mother. The sheriff was skeptical, saying the town was hiding something, but gradually it became clear. We couldn't stay. We left Maine, heading back to Providence. Dad said he tried to explain this fake family story to the sheriff, but the sheriff just brushed him off, said he'd spoken to everyone, and not a single person had ever seen the Baxters. It was all a lie. In the end, we moved away for good. Dad tried to explain that the townspeople were just using the Baxters to scare each other, but nobody believed him. The sheriff denied everything, and eventually we left, never looking back. We went back to Rhode Island, into a hotel, then a new apartment, until Dad found a place. We don't really talk about East Corinth anymore. No, one wants to think about that crazy chapter. But I still wonder, what was it all about? Did they really use the idea of the Baxters to blame all their worries on outsiders? Or was it just a way to keep the town's door shut, to keep strangers out forever? Who knows? Thanks for listening. Hit that notification bell if you want to hear more stories. I post every Monday and Thursday at 9 p.m. EST, with live streams on Sundays and Wednesdays. If you've got your own story, send it to my email at readsubmissions@gmail.com and you might get featured. Want early access or special content? Check out my Patreon or hit that join button, and listen to the Let's Read podcast for all these stories and more. Links in the description. Thanks again, friends, and remember, don't eat corn the long way.